All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we're diving deep into the world of Ford and GM.
Two of the biggest names in the game.
Exactly. We're going to take a look at their financial reports for 2023.
But we're going way beyond just like sales numbers.
Yeah, this is about getting a real sense of, their overall health, like what challenges are they facing?
And how are they preparing for like the future of the auto industry, which is changing so rapidly these days?
Right, it's a whole new landscape out there.
Absolutely. And to guide us on this deep dive, we've got their 2023 annual reports.
Packed with fascinating details and insights.
Things you wouldn't necessarily pick up just from reading the headlines.
Yeah, this is like getting a behind-the-scenes look.
Exactly, like peeking under the hood.
So think of this as a kind of head-to-head matchup.
A financial face-off, Ford versus GM.
Who's pulling ahead? Who's lagging behind? Let's find out.
Sounds good to me. Let's start with the basics revenue.
Okay, the top line number.
In 2023, GM raked in a whopping $192.3 billion in revenue.
Wow, that's a lot of dough.
It is Ford, on the other hand, came in at $176.2 billion.
Okay, so round one goes to GM.
So far, yeah.
But revenue is just one piece of the puzzle, right?
We got to look at profitability, too.
Right, because bringing in a ton of cash doesn't mean much if you're not making any profit.
Exactly. So let's look at EBIT earnings before interest and taxes.
Okay, EBIT for the win.
Ford's EBIT for 2023 was $10.4 billion.
Not too shabby.
Not bad at all, but GM's EBIT was even higher, $12.9 billion.
Wow, so advantage GM again?
Seems like they're in a pretty strong position, at least for now.
Yeah, but, I'm always curious about the bigger picture.
Of course, context is everything.
So how do these numbers compare to, previous years?
That's a great question, and it's key to understanding their overall financial health.
Right. Are they thriving? Are they struggling? Or are they kind of just, cruising along?
Well, if we look back over the past few years, we can see that GM has consistently shown stronger EBIT growth than Ford.
Interesting. So they're not just ahead this year. It's been a trend.
Exactly, which suggests they might be in a more robust financial position overall.
Okay, so GM seems to have the edge in terms of, financial stability.
At least based on these numbers.
But remember, we're not just here to crunch numbers.
Right, we're also digging into the risks and opportunities each company is facing.
And that's where things can get really interesting.
Absolutely, because those factors can have a huge impact on their future performance.
Totally. So when you were going through these reports, what were some of the things that jumped out at you?
One thing that immediately grabbed my attention was a pretty significant risk that Ford is facing.
Oh, really? What's that?
They're dealing with a potential $1.3 billion customs penalty.
Whoa, $1.3 billion. That's not small potatoes.
No, it's not. It's related to how they classified their Transit Connect vans for import.
Oh, wow. So it's like a legal issue.
Exactly, and it adds a big layer of uncertainty to their financial outlook.
Yeah, that kind of penalty could really force them to make some tough decisions.
Potentially about investments, operational changes, you name it.
Definitely a risk worth watching closely.
Absolutely.
Okay, so Ford's got this potential financial hit looming over them.
Yeah.
What about GM? Anything in their report that raised a red flag?
Well, one thing that stood out to me was their heavy reliance on GM Financial.
Their financing arm.
Yep. And in a stable economy, it might not be a huge concern.
Right. Makes sense.
But the current economic climate, rising interest rates, potential recession, worries, it adds a layer of risk.
Yeah, because if consumers start struggling, it could impact GM Financial's lending business.
Exactly. And that could ripple out to affect the whole company.
So it's a potential vulnerability.
That investors and analysts are keeping a close eye on for sure.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got Ford facing this potential financial penalty, and GM grappling with these economic headwinds.
It seems like each company has its own unique set of challenges to navigate.
For sure. But when you really dig into these reports...
Start to see some common ground, too.
Like what kind of common ground are we talking about?
Well, one thing that both companies are highly vulnerable to is supply chain disruptions.
Oh, yeah. That's been a big issue for so many industries lately.
Absolutely. And for both Ford and GM, they rely on these complex global networks of suppliers.
Right. So many moving parts.
Exactly. And any hiccup along the way can have a massive impact.
Whether it's like a natural disaster or geopolitical instability or even just a labor dispute at a key supplier.
Any of those things could really throw a wrench in the works.
And we've seen how fragile those supply chains can be in recent years.
Absolutely.
So how are Ford and GM trying to mitigate this risk? I mean, they can't exactly control the weather or global politics, right?
True, but they can take steps to make their supply chains more resilient.
Okay, so what are they doing?
Well, Ford's report emphasizes their efforts to diversify their supplier base.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. They're also investing in technology to improve visibility and tracking throughout their supply chain.
So they can anticipate and respond to potential disruptions more effectively.
Precisely.
Okay, so Ford's focused on diversification and technology. What about GM? Are they taking a similar approach?
Well, GM's strategy seems to lean more towards building stronger relationships with key suppliers.
Oh, so more of a collaborative approach.
Yeah, working closely together to ensure stability and minimize disruptions.
Interesting. So it's like two different paths towards the same goal.
Exactly. And they're also focusing on regionalizing their supply chains,
Meaning?
sourcing more components closer to their manufacturing facilities.
Okay. So less reliance on like far-flung suppliers.
Right, which can help reduce risks and lead times.
Interesting. So it sounds like both companies are really trying to create more stable and predictable supply chains?
They are just using slightly different tactics to get there.
Makes sense. Now, another big topic that's on everyone's mind these days is the shift towards electric vehicles.
The EV revolution?
Exactly. It's changing the game for the entire auto industry.
Absolutely. And both Ford and GM are investing heavily in this space.
They have to, right? It's the future.
It is, and it's fascinating to see how it's playing out in their financial strategies.
Okay, so tell me more about these different approaches.
Well, Ford seems to be laser focused on electrifying their most iconic and popular models.
Like what?
Think the F-150 pickup truck, the Mustang. These are vehicles that people already know and love.
Right, they have a huge fan base.
Exactly. So they're leveraging that existing brand recognition and customer loyalty.
To try and capture a large chunk of the EV market.
Exactly. It's a smart strategy capitalizing on their strengths.
And it's probably less risky than trying to launch a completely new EV brand from scratch.
That's true. It's a more established path.
Okay, so Ford's playing it a bit safer, focusing on what they already do. Well, what about GM? What's their game plan?
GM is taking a more diversified approach, developing a wider range of EVs.
Interesting. So not just focusing on their most popular models.
No, they're branching out, covering various segments from compact cars to luxury SUVs.
So it's like offering something for everyone.
Precisely aiming to appeal to a broader range of EV buyers.
Okay, so Ford is being more strategic with their EV rollout, while GM is going for a wider net.
It's an interesting contrast, and it'll be fascinating to see which strategy pays off in the long run.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just one of the many fascinating questions that these reports raise.
They offer such a valuable glimpse into how these automotive giants are navigating this rapidly changing industry.
And they provide insights for anyone interested in the future of transportation.
Absolutely.
I'm already hooked. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at some of the other unique risks and opportunities facing Ford and GM.
Sounds good to me. Let's delve into those next. Okay, so let's shift gears back to Ford for a second. Remember their decision to move away from Argo AI.
Their self-driving venture.
Yep, to develop their own autonomous systems in-house.
Yeah, I remember that. I was kind of wondering, like, was that a smart move or were they, like, falling behind in the self-driving race?
It's tough to say for sure. The report doesn't give us all the answers.
Right.
But we can make some educated guesses.
Okay, so what do you think?
Well, it could signal a shift in strategy. You know?
Like, what kind of shift?
Maybe prioritizing a more focused approach to autonomous driving tech.
Okay.
Perhaps they felt Argo AI's broader focus wasn't aligning with their specific needs.
Yeah, it's like they want to control their own destiny with the technology instead of relying on a partner.
Exactly. But that comes with risks, too.
Like what?
Developing self-driving systems is expensive and challenging.
Yeah, it's a huge undertaking.
So Ford will have to prove they can keep pace with the big players like Tesla and Waymo.
Who've been pouring resources into it for years.
Right, so it's a gamble, but it could pay off big time if they succeed.
Okay, so that's one to watch for sure. Now, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, cybersecurity.
Oh, yeah.
GM's report flagged it as a major concern. Why is it such a big deal for them specifically?
Well, think about it. Today's cars are like rolling computers.
Right, so much tech packed into them.
Exactly, and all that connectivity opens up potential vulnerabilities.
For cyber attacks.
Exactly, and for GM, with their massive network of vehicles and connected services,
Big or even.
for sure a successful cyber attack could disrupt their operations, compromise sensitive data.
It could even endanger drivers.
Absolutely, it's a real threat.
It's kind of scary to think about it. It's not just a financial risk, it's a safety risk too.
You're right, it's something they have to take very seriously.
So what are they doing to protect themselves?
Well, the report highlights their multi-layered approach. They have a dedicated cybersecurity team. They're constantly monitoring for threats.
It's like they're on it.
Yeah, they're definitely aware of the risks, but it's an ongoing battle. The threat landscape is constantly evolving.
It's like a digital arms race.
You could say that.
Okay, so we've got Ford betting big on in-house autonomous driving and GM facing this constant cybersecurity threat. What else jumps out at you from these reports in terms of like distinct risks and opportunities?
Well, one thing that stands out for Ford is their concern about excess capacity for traditional vehicles.
Meaning, like, if the adoption of EVs is slower than they expect.
Exactly. They're investing heavily in EVs, but they can't just abandon gas-powered vehicles overnight.
Right, it's a balancing act.
It is, and their report highlights a few strategies they're using.
Like what?
They're streamlining operations, focusing on their most popular models.
Okay, so making the most of their existing business.
Yeah, and they're even using share buybacks to offset dilution from employee stock options.
Which can help maintain shareholder value during this transition.
Exactly. So they're trying to optimize their traditional business while still pouring resources into the electric future.
Makes sense. It's like hedging their bets.
In a way, yeah.
What about GM? Are they grappling with similar concerns about the pace of EV adoption?
Not to the same extent. It seems like they're more confident about the transition.
Really?
Yeah, they're leveraging their strong financial position to invest aggressively in EV tech and manufacturing capacity.
So they're going all in on EVs.
They're even setting ambitious targets for phasing out gas-powered vehicles entirely.
Wow, within the next decade.
Yeah, it's a bold move.
So it seems like they're really betting big on becoming a leader in the electric future.
They are, but of course it comes with risks.
Like what?
What if demand for EVs doesn't materialize as quickly as they expect?
Yeah, that could be a problem.
They could be left with stranded assets of financial burden.
Right, so it's a high-stakes game for both companies.
Absolutely.
But they're approaching it from different angles.
With different levels of caution and aggression, you could say.
Okay, now before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to touch on one more shared challenge that stood out to me: labor relations.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Both Ford and GM had new union contracts ratified in 2023.
Right. Big changes for both companies.
What does that mean for their bottom line?
Well, those new contracts, while great for workers, will definitely impact their cost structure.
Meaning?
Both companies will face increased labor costs in the coming years.
Which could eat into their profits.
Exactly, if they're not careful.
So how are they planning to manage that? Can they just raise prices on their vehicles?
Raising prices is always an option, but in a competitive market, it's not always the best solution.
Right. Consumers have choices.
Exactly. So Ford's report mentions their focus on automation and efficiency improvements.
To offset some of those rising labor costs.
Right. They're exploring ways to streamline their manufacturing processes, reduce waste.
So leveraging technology to become more efficient.
Precisely.
What about GM? Are they taking a similar approach?
GM's strategy leans more towards collaboration and workforce development.
Interesting.
They're working closely with the union to implement new training programs.
To help workers adapt to the changing industry.
Exactly, particularly in areas like EV production and software development.
So they're investing in their people as a key part of their strategy.
They are. It's a fascinating contrast to Ford's more technology-focused approach.
It really is. It highlights that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Absolutely. Each company is leveraging its strengths and resources to chart its own course.
In this ever-changing industry.
Just exactly.
Okay, so based on everything we've seen in these reports, what are your overall thoughts on the health of these companies?
That's a tough one.
Who do you think is better positioned for the future?
Well, both companies have their pros and cons.
Right.
GM seems to be in a stronger financial position overall. They have a more consistent track record of profitability.
Okay.
And a more aggressive approach to the EV transition.
I'm going all in.
But their reliance on GM Financial and the cybersecurity threats could pose significant challenges.
Okay, what about Ford?
Ford's facing a more uncertain financial outlook with that potential customs penalty hanging over them.
Yeah, that's a big one.
But their focus on efficiency, their strategic approach to autonomous driving, and their efforts to diversify their supply chain could give them an edge.
So it's really a toss-up.
It is.
It sounds like the next few years will be crucial for both companies as they navigate all these challenges and opportunities.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, for sure. What do you think listeners should pay close attention to as these stories unfold? Like we're saying, it all comes down to execution, right?
Exactly how well they adapt, how well they manage those risks.
And I guess also how quickly consumers embrace EVs.
That's a huge factor, for sure.
Okay, so beyond those specific points, anything else you think our listeners should keep an eye on?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this isn't just about Ford and GM, you
Right,
know?
it's about the bigger picture.
Exactly what we're seeing here reflects broader trends that are shaping the entire automotive industry.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like what kind of trends are you thinking of?
Well, there's growing concern about sustainability, for one.
Right, everyone's talking about going green,
And then you've got the rise of ride-sharing services.
like Uber and Lyft.
Exactly. They're changing the way people think about transportation.
Yeah, for sure. And, even the demographics of car buyers are shifting.
Absolutely. You don't see as many young people rushing to get their driver's licenses these days.
That's true. I guess they're more into like ride sharing and public transit.
Exactly. So while we've been focused on Ford and GM specifically, their experiences offer valuable lessons.
For understanding how companies across industries are dealing with disruption.
And transformation, it's like a case study in how to adapt and evolve to stay relevant.
That's a great point. It's not just about the auto industry.
Nope. These trends are happening everywhere.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big question you'd leave our listeners with?
Well, after looking at all this information, the question that really sticks with me is this: which company's approach to innovation will be more successful in the long run?
That's a good one. We've talked about how Ford is taking a more focused internal approach,
Right.
and GM is going for a broader, more collaborative strategy.
Exactly. It's like a clash of philosophies.
And only time will tell which one comes out on top.
It's not just about selling more cars, it's about shaping the future of mobility.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about today.
I hope so. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, from financial performance to risks and opportunities to the big shift towards EVs.
And we've talked about the importance of looking beyond the numbers to understand the bigger picture.
The trends, the strategies, the challenges, and the possibilities. It's been a fascinating journey. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. And I hope our listeners feel the same way.
I'm sure they do. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those engines revving and your minds curious. We'll see you next time.